Okay, so welcome back from the break. We're going to start right away here with Unit 4, which is the Introduction to Motor Skill Learning. And it's going to encompass Chapter 11, 12, and 13. Chapter 11 being Defining and Assessing Learning, Chapter 12 being the Stages of Learning, and Chapter 13 being the Transfer of Learning. So, as you guys have gone through these first few chapters, you can see that some of these concepts are starting to get integrated together and starting to see some terms that you were seeing in previous units and previous chapters. And that's kind of what we're going to be doing as we go through these next few chapters. Is you're going to get introduced to some terms, you get comfortable with some concepts, it's going to get more integrated, and you're going to see how it fits together with previous stuff as well. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is performance and learning. So we need to distinguish these two things apart. They're not exactly the same. Performance is the thing that you can observe. It is observable behavior. That makes sense, right? When you watch somebody do something, that is their performance of that particular skill. So we need to be able to monitor how that goes. Now, learning is not observed. You cannot see how someone's brain is working when they're learning, at least not practically from day to day. So we imply that people are learning based on their performance. So if their performance improves, we can understand that they're probably learning. If it doesn't change at all or gets worse, we can assume that they're not learning, or they're learning something that is faulty that's not allowing them to improve their performance. So that's something that is important to distinguish between those two terms. So learning as a definition is a change in the capability of a person to perform a skill that must be inferred from a relatively permanent improvement in performance as a result of practice or experience. So we want to see people who are learning, we want to see them have a permanent improvement in their skill relative to whatever they are learning. Now next we're going to talk about performance characteristics. So when we see people improve their performance, we should see these 6 components. The first one's improvement, the second one's consistency, third one's stability, fourth is persistence, fifth is adaptability, and the sixth is a reduction of attention demand. So as we improve, and as we get better, and as we learn, our performance should show these 6 components. Now if we talk about improvement, this seems like the most obvious one. As time goes by, your skill should get better. So we don't really need to spend any more time on that. Time goes by, should get improvement in your skill performance. The second part kind of integrates into improvement a little bit, which is consistency. So the performance should become increasingly more consistent. This means that from one performance to another, a person's performance characteristics should become more similar. So when, let's say, let's use golf again, like your golf swing. As you get better, your golf swing should look more and more and more similar from swing to swing. Next is stability. So stability is referring to the idea that your skill stays consistent no matter what context you're in. So if the environment changes, if there's crowd noise, if there is a different surface that you're playing the skill or playing the sport on, that skill should stay relatively stable as you learn and become more improved and more consistent with it. Next is persistence. So persistence implies that as time goes by, you maintain your improvement. It's not necessarily super up and down. You get some improvement, you're able to sustain that, or it persists over time so that you continue to see step-by-step improvement in your skill. So relatively permanent improvement in performance is kind of that idea of persistence. Next is adaptability. So this kind of is similar to stability, right? When we put you into a different context, when we put you in a different environment, when we put you into a different area where you need to be able to perform the skill, are you adaptable? Can you apply that skill into these different contexts? And so again, stability and adaptability, kind of similar, congruent terms in this scenario here. And then the final thing is reduction in attention demand. So we've talked about this a little bit in the past, This kind of implies some mastery, right? Like as you improve, as you become an expert at that particular skill, you don't need to spend as much brain energy or as much muscle energy on a particular skill. So you would see potentially less EMG activity. You would see less brain activity as you become more automatic at doing this skill. So that kind of goes back into, I believe, some of those Unit 2 concepts we talked about. Next is learning assessment techniques. So this is something that is going to be in your final project, which is performance curves. So as you learn a skill, there are different ways that you can learn that skill, and there are different patterns in which you learn it. So they are represented by 4 different shaped curves. Any of you who have done math, which I hope all of you have at this point, would understand kind of how these curves apply a little bit. And basically it just shows you in which way that you are improving in your learning. And so we have linear improvement, which is as time goes by, your improvement goes up. We have negatively accelerated, which says as time goes by, initially you have lots of learning, you learn a ton, but then eventually you kind of master the skill. And so your amount of learning and your amount of improvement kind of decreases as time goes on. So this is kind of like, I would liken B more to like driving, right? There's a certain level that you can get to. So initially when you first start driving, you're learning lots. You're like, oh, there's different signs, and I have to learn, you know, what speed is in this area. And there's a lot of learning early on. But then as you get better at driving, there's only so good that you can get. You start to taper out on how much you learn. Next is positively accelerated learning. So as you learn more, your improvement exponentially improves. Right? So this is a really tough one. There's not a ton of skills that do this because it basically implies that the more time that goes on, the more that you learn, you just continuously improve and get better at a quicker and quicker rate. So not a ton of skills that are like that. And then D is this ogive or S-shaped curve. Just call it an F-shaped curve just to keep it simple for you guys. Is basically saying there is a middle point where initially you don't learn a lot of things because it's a difficult task. You're really challenged in the middle part, and then as you start to understand it, you're going to learn a lot in the middle part, and then eventually you reach mastery, where eventually the learning curve starts to drop off. So there are certain skills like this, like really complex skills. You know, a great example might be like chess, for example, where initially when you're just starting to learn chess, you're just trying to learn like what moves what moves where, really challenging to kind of understand. But once you understand some of the strategy to it, you can learn a lot in the middle parts as you improve, and then eventually you kind of reach this mastery component where, again, you're only going to get so good. There's only so many ways that you can improve, and then it kind of drops off after that. So a little note here is that you should understand that these curves that are above here are smoothed out. And so typically learning doesn't happen in these really smooth lines. It's generally kind of up and down, as it shows in figure 11.1, which is basically showing a big jagged line above. So you can go up to that and you can see that things go up and down relatively significantly, but the general trend should be something that looks like these curves here. Next, we're moving down to different tests. So how do you assess if someone is improving or not? And one of the first things that you can do is a retention test. And this is often something we do in school. So we say, hey, I'm going to give you X amount of content, and then in this amount of time, you are going to spit this information back out me, and you're going to tell me if you're retaining it. So a lot of quizzes and midterms that you do are retention tests, right? So that would be a great example. If you wanted to learn a motor skill, you could say, hey, I want you to learn how to juggle, and then I'm going to come back to you. You're going to take a complete break off for a week from juggling, and then I want to see if you can retain that test, or you can retain that skill. That's a retention test. Conversely, we also have transfer tests. So a transfer test is basically saying, hey, if I have you learn this skill, can you apply it to a new context? So if I taught you how to juggle, and I said, hey, you can keep practicing juggle, 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 now can you do it in front of a crowd of 1,000 people? That would be a transfer test. You're changing the context in which you do it. You're saying, hey, can you take that skill and apply it to a different thing? I'm also testing you guys in this course both ways. So if this gives you a bit of clarity to it, your retention tests would be like your quizzes. So I give you guys a quiz to do. I'm saying, hey, can you retain this information? Yeah, of course. Is it open book? Yeah, does that change things a bit? For sure. But I'm asking if you can retain the information and you can spit it back out to me in a way that shows that you understand. I'm also testing you on a transfer test. I'm saying, hey, can you take all of this information, put it into a final project, and then spit out the information that I had you guys learn? Can you transfer it to your skill that you need to learn as the semester goes on? So that would be an example of a transfer test. Now, transfer tests, they can be applied in multiple different ways. So if we kind of look at the few different context changes, one is the availability of augmented feedback. So when we ask somebody to transfer a test over, sometimes we'll give them less and less feedback. We won't tell them, hey, you're doing this wrong, or you need to improve at this, or you need to get better at this. We often just decrease how much feedback they're getting so that they have to rely on their own error mechanisms and their own assessment of the skill in order to reflect a good performance of the skill. The second part is the physical environment. So are you on a different court? Are you playing in the wind or the rain? Or is it super hot outside? Just changing the actual physical environment can really affect someone's performance, and it can also show that they have the ability to be adaptable and have that persistence and consistency in these different contexts as well. And then the third part of a transfer test could be the personal characteristics of the test taker as they relate to the skill performance. Here the focus is on how well a person can perform the skill while adapting to characteristics of himself or herself that were not present during the practice. So an example of this would be if you had a person perform a skill in a stressful situation. So, if we get someone in a state where they have higher stress or there's more nerves, that can actually obviously affect performance. And then can we get someone to be able to perform that test again consistently and make it be stable over time, even despite those stressors? And that's kind of when sometimes you see coaches try and have practices in like game formats, or you see golfers, for example, like being nervous over a 5-foot putt when you're trying to win a tournament. Sometimes what they'll get people to do is they get players to run laps around the putting green and then come back and hit that putt, because it makes their heart beat like crazy. It makes their arms feel really light. It's saying, hey, can you perform under that stress? Can you perform under that context of having that nerves or something that feels similar to it? All right, moving forward. Next, we're going to talk about practice performance and its misrepresentation of learning. So sometimes you practice something and it looks like you're not improving. It looks like nothing's getting better, and oftentimes we just call that a plateau. So everyone knows this term either from working out or from your own learning experiences in the past, where you reach a point where you just don't improve anymore. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not learning. It just shows that your performance isn't getting better. So that's kind of something that we have to take into consideration, is there's going to be times when your brain and your body needs time to process things, and oftentimes that's when we see these plateaus, is there requires some time and continued effort for that plateau to pass so that there's continued learning beyond that point. Now, there are several reasons why plateaus occur. One is that the plateau represents a period of transition between two phases of acquiring certain aspects of a skill. During this transition, the person is developing a new strategy that the task requires to increase the level of performance already achieved. Consequently, no performance improvement occurs. So, again, you might be kind of figuring out a new way to do something, and so that's the first reason why you don't improve. Another possible explanation is that it represents a period of poor motivation. So if you're getting burnout or you're just sick of doing a particular thing over and over and over, you may just not be motivated to continue that learning component. And that does happen to people, right? Like if you're just doing the same thing over and over, you can just be like, okay, I've had enough. You need to step away so that, again, you can process it, or you can come back and find some more motivation or enjoyment in that task. And then finally, it's possible the plateau may be due not to these performance characteristics, but to limitations imposed by the performance measure. This is the case when the performance measure involves what is known as ceiling or floor effects. These effects occur when the performance measure will not permit the score to go above or below a certain point, such as when there is a minimum amount of time in which something can be performed, which is a floor effect, or a maximum score that can be attained, which is a ceiling effect. So, if you guys remember a few chapters ago, I talked about the Berg balance scale. And that's a scale that we use for balance in the clinic. And I think that's a great example of like a ceiling effect. So if I get, an old person who sucks at balance, a Berg balance scale could be really, really good. And so that's why they indicate for a Berg balance scale, you generally want to use it on patients who are roughly 65 years or up. If I brought one of you guys in and I had you guys do the Berg balance scale, that is a poor indicator of your balance. It has, you guys are going to blow past the ceiling of 56 points, which is how many points the Berg balance scale is on, because the Berg balance scale is so easy for the average person that they would score probably way higher than 56 points if it allowed there to be more than 56 points. So oftentimes, that ceiling effect is present on certain skills if someone's way too good for the skill. And the floor effect is in play when someone is so bad, and that's maybe a harsh term, but they're not able to do a skill up to the level to meet the minimum score, right? So those are kind of things that you want to take into consideration when we're scoring things. Is it might not show improvement. Like if you guys are doing a Berg balance scale and you're scoring 56 out of 56 every single time, of course it's not going to show improvement. Even though your balance might actually be getting better, it doesn't show improvement because of that ceiling effect. And the inverse, it may not show you're improving because you can't even hit the floor. You can't get to the minimum points required to accomplish it either. So take that into consideration when you're measuring and using outcome measures, which is something we talked about way back early in the semester. So that is the end of chapter 11. We will see you for chapter 12.